In the year 2000, a small startup approached Blockbuster with an offer. They asked the company to buy them for just $50 million. Blockbuster executives listened to the pitch, and then they laughed. They rejected the offer completely. Today, that small startup is worth over $200 billion. And the mistake Blockbuster made that day became one of the biggest business failures in history. Because that startup was Netflix. And this is the story of how Netflix destroyed Blockbuster. To understand how this happened, we need to go back to the 1990s. At that time, Blockbuster was not just a successful company. It was a cultural phenomenon. On Friday nights, millions of families would get into their cars and drive to their local Blockbuster store. Parents walked through the aisles searching for movies. Kids rushed toward the shelves filled with the latest releases. Friends debated which film to rent for the weekend. The experience became part of everyday life. The bright blue and yellow Blockbuster sign became one of the most recognizable brands in the world. At its peak, Blockbuster had more than 9,000 stores globally. Its stores were located in cities, suburbs, and small towns. Wherever people wanted movies, Blockbuster was there. Customers walked through long aisles filled with VHS tapes. Later, those tapes were replaced with DVDs. And every weekend, millions of rentals were processed. The company generated billions of dollars every year. To most people, Blockbuster looked unstoppable. No one imagined that such a giant could ever be replaced. But somewhere else, a small idea was quietly forming. In 1997, two entrepreneurs were working on a new concept. Their names were Reed Hastings and Mark Randolph. They believed the future of entertainment would not be tied to physical stores. Instead, they imagined something different. What if people could order movies online and receive them directly in their mailbox? At the time, this idea sounded strange. The internet was still new. Online shopping was not yet common. Most people were used to driving to stores to buy or rent things. So the idea of renting movies online seemed unusual. But Hastings and Randolph believed the concept could work. They launched a small company called Netflix. At first, Netflix operated as a DVD by mail service. Customers visited the Netflix website, selected the movies they wanted, and those DVDs were delivered by mail. When they finished watching, they simply mailed the disc back. The system was simple, but it had one powerful advantage. Blockbuster's business model depended heavily on something customers hated: late fees. If a customer rented a movie and forgot to return it on time, they had to pay a penalty. Sometimes those penalties were small, but often they added up quickly. In fact, late fees generated hundreds of millions of dollars for Blockbuster every single year. For the company, late fees were extremely profitable, but for customers, they were incredibly frustrating. Netflix saw an opportunity. Instead of charging late fees, Netflix introduced a completely different model. Customers paid a monthly subscription. With that subscription, they could keep DVDs as long as they wanted. There were no penalties, no deadlines, and no late fees. For many customers, this felt like a breath of fresh air. By the year 2000, however, Netflix was struggling financially. Running a startup was expensive. Shipping DVDs across the country cost money, and the company had not yet become profitable. So the founders decided to approach Blockbuster with a bold proposal. They offered to sell Netflix for $50 million. To the founders, this seemed like a reasonable deal. Blockbuster was the industry leader. It had the resources and the infrastructure. Together, the two companies could dominate entertainment. So Reed Hastings and his team presented their idea to Blockbuster executives. But the response was not what they expected. Blockbuster's leadership looked at Netflix as a small niche company. They believed their thousands of retail stores gave them an unbeatable advantage. Streaming technology was still in its early stages, and online movie rentals seemed like a minor trend. So Blockbuster rejected the offer. They walked away from the deal. That single decision would later become one of the most expensive mistakes in business history. Around the same time, something extraordinary was happening. The internet was expanding rapidly. More households were gaining access to high-speed connections. Technology was evolving, and digital streaming was slowly becoming possible. Netflix recognized this opportunity earlier than most companies. Instead of focusing only on DVDs by mail, the company began investing heavily in streaming technology. This decision required enormous risk. At the time, Streaming infrastructure was expensive, and many people doubted whether consumers would ever watch movies online. But Netflix believed that digital streaming was the future, so the company started building the platform that would eventually change entertainment forever. Meanwhile, Blockbuster continued focusing on its traditional business model. Its entire system depended on physical stores. Stores required rent. They required employees. They required inventory. And they depended on customers visiting in person. For years, this model worked extremely well. But technology was changing faster than expected. As internet speeds improved, streaming became more practical. Customers no longer needed to drive to stores. They could simply watch movies at home. Netflix was ready for this shift. Blockbuster was not. As streaming grew more popular, fewer customers visited rental stores. Blockbuster's massive retail network became a burden. Operating thousands of locations was expensive. Revenue began declining. Stores started closing. One by one, Blockbuster locations disappeared. The company attempted to launch its own online services. But by then, Netflix had already built a strong lead. The shift in technology had happened too quickly. Blockbuster could not adapt in time. In 2010, Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy. The company that once dominated the entertainment world was gone. The story of Netflix and Blockbuster reveals an important lesson in business. Sometimes the biggest companies fail, not because they lack money, resources, or power, but because they ignore change. Technology moves quickly, consumer behavior evolves, and industries can transform almost overnight. The companies that survive are the ones willing to adapt, the ones willing to take risks, the ones willing to reinvent themselves. That willingness to change is often the hidden strategy behind the world's most successful businesses. And that is the hidden wealth code. If you enjoy discovering the real strategies behind billion-dollar companies and global empires, subscribe to the Wealth Code Stories, because the next story might completely change how you see business.